This podcast was originally recorded for DevChat TV.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sustain Our Software podcast, where we talk about how to sustain our software. Surprisingly, we have two hosts today. I'm Richard Littauer. Hello. And we also have Pia.
Hello.
And then we also have Robert Kaye. Kaye? Kaye?
Kaye.
Kaye. Robert Kaye. And you're calling from Barcelona, right?
Correct.
Awesome.
We've been recording Ruby Rogue since 2011, and we've talked to a lot of people who have had a really deep influence, not only on the programming community, but also on the Ruby community. And as we've talked to these people, it's become apparent to me that we talk a lot about the things that make them interesting that they've done, but we don't really get into how they got into programming or how they came up in their career, how they got to be the person who invented whatever library or technique that they came on the show to talk about. And so I put together a show where we actually highlight these things. We talk to them about how they got into programming. We talk to them about how they got into Ruby, maybe how they got into Rails. We get a little bit deep into what makes them tick and why they are the way they are. And then we talk about what they're working on. We talk about the things that make them well known or make them interesting. And a lot of times it's the stuff that goes beyond the code that really makes these people tick and makes them the kind of people that we want to hear about. And so I put together a show called My Ruby Story. You can find it at myrubystory.com. And it's where I interview these people and just get the stories of these people and how they came into programming. So if you want to hear inspirational stories or get ideas on how you can actually advance your career, then go check it out at myrubystory.com.
What is it you do? Tell us about yourself and how you got involved with, I believe, MusicBrainz?
Mm-hmm. So I'm officially, the boring title is the Executive Director of the MetaBrainz Foundation. The more interesting title is the Benevolent Dictator for Life of MusicBrainz and the other projects and so forth. Just flows a little bit better in a lot of grand scheme of things. We try not to take ourselves very seriously. But the MetaBrainz Foundation was originally created to be the legal umbrella for MusicBrainz. Now, when we actually created the foundation, we knew that we would eventually branch out into other projects, and we've done that. So now we have projects like ListenBrainz and AcousticBrainz and CritiqueBrainz, and also branching out into a new domain, books. So we have BookBrainz as well. So, a lot of these are sort of, bifurcating. Our attention is being spread a little bit more, but we're accomplishing more things in the grand scheme of things. And I can get more into those particular projects if you want to hear about them. How I got started with this, originally it was all started off by me hacking on some MP3 projects back in the day when MP3 was, like most of the world, I hadn't heard about MP3. And the metadata on these files was absolutely terrible. And then Napster came about, and if you wanted to listen to a music collection, it was just a really crap experience, right? It really wasn't very good. So the metadata was bad, and one thing led to another, and I decided to actually create MusicBrainz. It took me about 4 years of working with MusicBrainz to see where there could actually be a bit of a business model behind it. Once I could recognize what that business model was, then we actually moved to create a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit in California. Then it took another 3 years for reasonable amounts of money to come in, but I've basically been paid by the foundation since 2007. And now we've actually gotten up to, what is a reasonable salary. Most of my peers that were working in Silicon Valley and whatnot, earning 3 times what I'm earning. But I think my job satisfaction is considerably greater than theirs. So that's one of those factors that needs to be taken into account. I got started with all of this very early on because, and this is even before the GPL the GPL wasn't really on people's minds. It had barely been created. But this was in the late 80s and early 90s. There was a database called CDDB. And it was a database that had all the track titles of a bunch of CDs on them, because the CDs themselves didn't have the track titles. So you plug a CD in your computer, and then it would just tell you track 1, track 2, track 3, which I thought was boring. Now, these two college kids that came up with a concept of having a program that identifies these CDs, and then I started typing in these CDs. That was great. It was the most natural thing to do, right? So I typed these in, and maybe 200 of these, right? Because I wanted my music to show up properly when I was listening to it while I was at work. Well, that worked out okay. And then one day, out of the blue, the company I was working for that was different from when I originally started, we'd actually started using the database, and we got a notice from this company saying, like, yeah, we have bought these guys out, and you must now display our logo and our jingle. This was back in the day when UIs were not very common, right? So, well, we have a text program. We can't play audio. We can't show an image. And they basically said, nope, you can't use our database. What? So I was angry at this. I felt that this was very much a public trust sort of violation. And I was fuming about this. And I was standing with a friend at a party who was actually working at the same company. And he said, you know what? I'm just sick and tired of listening to you just be about this. Can you just stop? Like, start an open source project and just leave me alone. He turns heel, walks away, and leaves me standing there. I was just like, okay, right. And that was pretty much the case.
That's a good friend. That's a really good friend.
My friends are just impatient with my constant complaining. So yeah, right.
Well, I'm super excited to hear that someone worked on this problem, because I spent hours and days and months as a teenager in Winamp editing every single metadata file.
That's so painful. So painful.
It was kind of fun in a neurotic way. Like I went straight from organizing my National Geographics to organizing my brand new, discography.
Yeah.
But
now we have tools like MusicBrainz Picard, and where you can download an album and it recognizes the album and you drag it over and you save it. I mean, sometimes they can tag an entire album just because the database is there underpinning all of this in about 3 seconds, right? That wasn't possible back in the day when we're editing with Winamp, right? That was just, a serious labor of love. You really needed to have your metadata to be correct.
So what was the business model that you hit on? How did that go from, hey, here's my open source project, and it's 2004 or something? How did you go to, I need to get money for this?
The basic understanding was that the data was constantly changing, and as more people had access to laptops and cheap recording equipment and so forth, there was a lot more music that was being created. And this data all had to get in the database. And the music industry has never built this database. They've always been forward-looking towards the next release, and they didn't really care about the back catalog. That's just not really something that they earn money off, right? They just didn't really care. I recognize that the main factor was churn of data, like getting more data, getting cleaner data, getting better data. Also then ideas around context of the data. So where are Facebook feeds, Twitter feeds, where you can download the music, that sort of stuff. Recognize that this churn was effectively going to be the ability for me to actually play a bit of a gatekeeper. And in 2003, we came up with a service that we called the live data feed. And the live data feed, what it does is it allows anyone to actually set up a copy of MusicBrainz. And then if you turn on the live data feed, then you'll actually get hourly updates. And these hourly updates apply the latest changes that to MusicBrainz has published and applies them to your own copy, right? So now the database is, we see somewhere between 200 and 400 people on any random week that are updating their own copies of MusicBrainz, whether they're big companies, Google, Amazon, BBC, what have you, or a whole pile of individuals that are much more insane about the music tagging inclinations than we were. Right? These people are taking it to way greater extremes than what I'd ever envisioned. So that's pretty good. But the idea there was that there was this recognition that we have this live data feed, and what we were going to create value around it. I really hate the word monetize, so we're really not going to try to use that. Creating value was around a service where we provided timely and convenient access to the data. Because it's always taken about an hour to import a data snapshot. Data snapshots are Creative Commons Zero licensed, right? So you can just download that. But that just ends up being a pain to do on, whatever update frequency you wanted to do, right? So if you're an actual company that wanted to do this and you wanted to provide 24/7 data access availability to your customers, that would be a pain to do. So you go give these metadata hippies a little bit of money, that's us, and to pay for the live data feed. And sure enough, that worked. Now, it worked to some degree, right? Because what we had done is we effectively were what I would call licensed purists, right? We were just, effectively working on licensing this stuff and really trying to believe in Creative Commons licenses. And we're one of the first people to adopt Creative Commons licenses. And still, we're creating a new Creative Commons license document once an hour. And we've been doing that for the last 16 years. So we're kind of prolific Creative Commons publishers in that respect. And it's machine curated and so forth, but all the changes are actually made by humans at the end. So we recognized, this system basically worked, but it got us to about $250,000 in annual revenue. And that basically meant we had myself and a couple of other people on staff, but we had ambitions to do much, much more. And for a long time, I figured that, I tried to actually stab at it and say, okay, so how can we say 1 million web service requests are going to cost this much money? Maybe this service costs that, this costs that. And I spent a lot of time trying to make it work, trying to figure out how we could actually make more money than what we've been making up until this point, right? And when I just actually sliced and diced it beyond that, I couldn't even get to the same level of the money that we've been getting from customers at that point. So I took, in 2015, a bit of a radical step. And I said, okay, we're just going to effectively not really care about licenses anymore. We've never cared about code licenses for code because our code runs MusicBrainz. You're not going to take our code and integrate our code into your application. Just no. So that's pointless. Taking our data is kind of useful, but if you don't have updates, then that's not so useful. So really, the actual value that we have isn't in the data. It's not in the code. It isn't in me. It's actually in the community of people, right? So it's the people that are editing the database present the actual value in all of this. So with this recognition, I just said, screw it. Let's just do away with copyrights, right? Let's just not even, they're not even really applicable to us anymore. And what I did is said, okay, we're just changing to a support model. And I basically came up with bronze, silver, gold, and unicorn tiers. So there's $100, $500,000, and $1,500 a month. And the unicorn is for mythical situations and other things, large companies and mythical situations, right? I kind of thought I was going out on a limb, being a bit childish with this, but it turns out that people really kind of embraced it and said oh, yeah, well, we're just a startup, so we want to sign up on bronze, but we hope to become unicorn. Snicker, snicker, snicker. So it's kind of funny, right? The bottom line is that we have a lot of startups that are coming in. They want to do the right thing. They're giving us $100 a month. And then we have pretty much all of the big companies. So if a big company walks in, it's just like, you guys are unicorn. I don't really care, right? But some of the unicorns also pay twice market rates because they're sometimes seeing you have special needs or don't want to give attribution and so forth. We'll charge a little extra for that. But so the basic idea then is that people giving us support, and we're not even saying, if you use the live data feed, or if you use the data snapshots, or use this data or that data, if you gave us commercial support that is on a sliding scale according to what you can pay, so depending on whether it's bronze or unicorn, then you can choose whatever we produce. We don't care how you use it. Just use it. Also, the idea is that this is the way if somebody comes in for one of our new projects and wants to use that data in a new project, that then lifts the other projects up as well. So this is sort of opening in the umbrella to all of the projects and all the data sets that we have in our database. And this actually worked. So last year, our income actually made it to $500,000 a year, which is,
right.
Not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but I'm proud of that, right? Yeah. Because now I have a ragtag team of people that are scattered between Chicago and India, and we're all hacking on things. And the one thing I keep harping on is quality of life. And with that, we're hoping that, if I can make my team happy, and, nobody's paid competitively, least of all myself. But most everyone, except for myself, is at about 80 to 90% of their market value. But the quality of life that my team enjoys is definitely higher than pretty much anybody else that's doing these sort of technical jobs. But this is all on the basis of the system where we just said, we don't really care about copyright anymore. If you use our data, you should support us one way or another. Support is according to your means. And most people just look at this and say, yeah, okay, that seems fair. Let's go, right? And we usually find a way in which to find some sort of price point where people say, yeah, this makes sense for us. But it's about having a conversation with these people, understanding what their needs are, what their desires are, what they want to do. And then, somehow meeting them in the middle and actually treating any of our, we don't actually call them customers, we call them supporters, right? And the idea is that these people would then actually become more or less our partners, that we're working together, because when you're dealing with such a database and they have, a few million links to our database, well, they're somewhat dependent on us. So we have to ensure that we're going to be here tomorrow, right? And they understand this, and by giving us a little bit of money, they understand that this now allows us to be around tomorrow, to continue hacking on these things, and to continue improving our services. So
interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about BookBrainz and what is it about? And that data set. I'm just a bit of a bookworm, so I was, drawn to that in your website.
Okay. So BookBrainz is, if you understand what MusicBrainz is, it is simply MusicBrainz applied to a new domain, namely books. There's some overlap because there's audiobooks and MusicBrainz as well, so some of the authors are already inside of MusicBrainz and so forth. The problem in the book space is slightly different. The bottom line is that you've got a bunch of book databases as well, but they're all under Amazon's control or somebody else's control or a publisher's control, and not really freely available for anybody else to use. So,
and this is also titles of books and authors and year and the whole metadata about around the book product.
Yep, all of it. Now, originally the project was conceived as a community-driven project where we didn't actually give any official support to it. The project really actually took off in community mindset. Sort of a lot of people really felt like this is the project that they wanted to see. And Summer of Code students came really wanting to work on it. Also partially because the project is a little bit more hip. It's written in JavaScript across, some of the older ones are in Python and Perl. Everything else in between is Python now. So the project is still fairly nascent. And I doubled down on the project about a year ago. I said, look, the volunteers that were working on it were not really making enough progress to actually continue keeping the community happy. So I said, okay, we have a little bit of money, and I hired a full-time engineer to work on it. And I tasked him to, within maybe 6 months, bring it to minimally viable product. A year later, we're still not quite there, but he's making really good moves in the right direction. Once we're done with that, we're in talks with Open Library and with other open data library projects. Mm. And the general consensus is that MusicBrainz has demonstrated that we do metadata, the base underlying metadata really well, deal with disambiguation and conflicts and deduplication, those sorts of things. So we're going to take all of our expertise and basically pour it into BookBrainz, just the way we do typically, and build the base layer of this data so that organizations like Internet Archives and Open Library and so forth can build other tools on top, more like the Goodreads, so the recommendation engines that are sitting on top of the core of this data. My hope with MusicBrainz is to eventually go, and I'll talk about this in a little bit if I get an opportunity, but we're trying to break some of the silos that are out there in the music industry, right? And the book industry really isn't any different, right? There's just a pile of walled gardens and so forth. Music industry loves their walled gardens. They, data enter Spotify, it never comes back out. Spotify's actually better than some of the others, but, it's data enters Apple Music and nothing's ever coming back out, right? So, and these sorts of walled gardens are things that really, really just aggravate me. Because as open source nerds, we abhor walled gardens, right? We like nice gardens, right? But we like interoperability, and those are things that are of great value to us. So these are the things that have been really on my mind. I don't know, did I answer your question sufficiently about BookBrainz?
Yeah. I'm happy to move on to the silos.
Yeah. So one of the things that bugs me about the silos, and this books versus music, we're further along with the book, with the music, because the database is mature. Still a lot of things coming in, so the project will never be done, but it's mature compared to the other data sets that we have. But we have been working for the last 4 years on 2 new projects that are important to us. MusicBrainz. And MusicBrainz is basically the project that does machine analysis, and then machine learning on top of that analysis to determine what music sounds like, right? So it's the acoustic characteristics. And then trying to derive from that whether it has vocals, whether it's male, female, does it have a guitar, does it have, what genre does it fit into, and so forth. There's all kinds of stuff that's going into it. The data set is starting to reach maturity. One thing that we're calculating out of that data is beats per minute. And that data is already interesting in the MusicBrainz world. So that's one project. The other project that we built is ListenBrainz. And ListenBrainz, do you remember Last.fm?
Of course.
Good. One of the things that Last.fm did is allow you to, plug your music player in and then send the metadata of what you just listened to Last.fm. So that builds your entire listening history of what you just listened to. So we built that with ListenBrainz. And you can go back and import your Last.fm listening history, and I encourage you to do this since you clearly have a Last.fm listening history. You can import this listening history into ListenBrainz, and now we will keep it open. We will share it with everyone else, right? But most of the profiles in Last.fm were public anyway. So people are happy with sharing this information. And we make it clear that if you use ListenBrainz, your data will be public. And if not, you shouldn't use ListenBrainz. As long as you're good with that premise, and a lot of people are, then we're going to keep your data, safe, and we're going to keep it up and running. But the beautiful thing about that is that it's the perfect basis for building a collaborative filtering algorithm around people who listen to this might also like that, right? We've been spending pretty much most of the summer building a Spark cluster and using the collaborative filtering algorithms in Spark to basically start building the collaborative filtering of this sort of data and generating a data set for that. In parallel, we had another Summer of Code project that works with MusicBrainz to calculate track-to-track similarities. If I have this track, what other tracks sound similar to this one? So we're building those data sets, and we're hopefully going to create a very large virtual machine where you can download all of this. It's got to be a monster download. But if you download this monster virtual machine, then you basically have a sandbox in which anyone can come in and create an open source music recommendation engine. Now, the first music recommendation engines we're going to create are going to be terrible, right? But one difference with this recommendation engine from all of the other ones is that ours is open. And it's built on open data, and we're going to invite a bunch of people in to come in and play with this. Because there's some latent, pent-up energy for building a recommendation engine. It's been a really difficult thing to do because you don't have these massive databases to build these recommendation engines with, right? Sometimes researchers have been doing these sorts of things and so forth, and they just pat themselves on the back when they say oh yeah, we have a really big data set. It's 2,000 tracks, right? And we're just looking at it like, 2,000 tracks, go away, right? I mean, if it's not 1 million tracks, it's not a worthwhile data set.
I just checked my personal profile on Last.fm. I haven't logged in years, and apparently I'm still scrobbling. So I have 228,000 listens on it alone.
Yes.
So that's just mine.
Yeah, please import those into ListenBrainz because that helps us. Right?
But we're seeing a lot more recommendation engines, right? So Amazon's really keen on this. They've always been big, but also Goodreads recommend stuff.
We don't really care about any of those, right? Yeah. Because they're closed.
Yeah, they're closed. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that we care about are building open ones.
So I've had issues with Spotify where it would recommend tracks for me, and it was totally not based on my listening history, my listening history at all. So for instance, every Sunday morning, it's like, hey, time to go to church playlist. And I haven't been to church since I was 15 when I left in a huff.
Yeah.
And so it's
and then everybody got recommended Drake when his album came out. I never listened to Drake, right? So this, you're touching on what is, my pet peeve in this particular space, that these recommendation engines are entirely biased. Also, we know where the recommendations in this bias is coming from because the people that own Spotify are the record labels and they want to push their content. So it's not surprising that there's bias.
And it's not the people who work on that either. Like one of my good friends is the guy who works on the recommendation engine for Spotify. And he's a nice guy and he's not trying to do it, but there's top-down level stuff. So it's institutional, systematic. We want people to listen to this, which is awful, right? I should be able as a human to listen to what I want. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all designed not only to feed money back into the existing big labels, but also to keep everyone inside of the silo, right? And this walled garden. So these things all just really aggravate me quite a lot.
How did you sell this to funders? How did you get people to really give you money if it's really clear? You just don't at all?
No, I mean, so if you look at our funders, if you go to metabrainz.org/supporters.
I saw Google.
So the thing is, these people, are giving us money for MusicBrainz. And the things that we're building, nobody else is we've talked to Spotify. Spotify is we had a good relationship with Spotify as well, right? So not a problem there. And by and large, they just don't really feel threatened by us. And also, this is not really very public yet because we're still tinkering on this stuff, right? We're far from done with it yet. But we're just now arrived at the point where the money that's coming in from running MusicBrainz, we have a slight bit of excess cash that allows us to actually funnel it towards developing MusicBrainz and ListenBrainz. And now ListenBrainz Labs, which is the recommendation side of things, right? So it's way early on. And, one of the things that I want to do, and this, finally goes back to sustaining open source and sustaining ourselves in this particular case, is that by building a recommendation engine and ultimately have this perhaps Quixotic idea that what we want to do is if there's a music label, small, medium music label that comes in and they have one computer geek on staff, right? Dedicated computer geek, and their job is to make things better. What they can do, and what I want them to do, is to be able to say, all right, we're going to go feed all of the MusicBrainz data, all of our data from our label into MusicBrainz. And then what we're going to do is we're going to download a specially trained music recommendation engine for our label, and then allow people to say, okay, I let you listen to this music. Maybe they point them to the Spotify profile or to the MusicBrainz profile, whatever, to solve the cold start problem for the recommendation, and then to actually start recommending content of that particular label. So I envision something where, people arrive at a label's webpage, then say, oh yeah, make me a customized playlist that's good for me. You get the customized playlist made, and now you listen to the content that label has recommended for you because they know about you. They know about your listening proclivities. And now the data is there to do this, right? And, my hope is that, these labels, none of them are really would pay us more like $100 a month, but still, and there's a pile of labels out there that do these sorts of things. And if they could get a recommendation engine for $100 a month, they'd be tickled pink. So, and, if their geeks are doing the work to bring these systems online and so forth, that should be a win-win all around. That's kind of where I'm thinking.
That's awesome.
Back when functional programming was making its resurgence, I found it really interesting that a lot of people were moving over there, and it almost felt like it was on hype. And I didn't really understand the power of functional programming until I learned Elixir. Elixir is a functional programming language. It's built on the Erlang virtual machine, and it really does some interesting things and makes you build apps in a different way. But what's really fascinating about it is the speed of the applications, the ability to distribute work easily, and just how it manages the functional programming and all of the nice things about it so that you don't have to worry about side effects and a lot of the other things that come out of functional programming. Plus, pattern matching in Elixir is a killer feature. If you're looking for a new language that you want to learn that is going to make a difference for you and give you the opportunity to challenge some of your thinking and find a new way of doing it, Elixir is a great way to go. And we have a podcast now on Elixir called Elixir Mix, and you can find that at elixirmix.com.
It's also really close to home for me. I actually had a website for a while, losslesslabels.com, where I was trying to make a list of all the labels that provide lossless music because I really wanted lossy stuff. And I got sick of crappy MP3s back when in the Napster days. I want to move back a bit to sustaining. So one of the things you talked about was quality of life for your developers. How do you reconcile having quality of life for your developers and letting them have, maybe their Fridays off or letting them go for walks? I don't know, whatever you do to make their lives great, versus this desire to get all this stuff out the door and to build MusicBrainz into a great thing, which is probably there. I see some ambition, not negative ambition, but you have goals. So how do you reconcile those two things?
You know what? I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about that. It's just a very basic idea that if you trust your team and you, I don't want to use the word empower either, right? But my team has the ability to carry out whatever they need to do their job. I basically only get in the way when it has to do with legal and money. So those are the two things. My team knows, okay, it's a legal question or it's a money question. We need to go back to Rob and ask him. Everything else, the teams are self-empowered to do as they need to do. And we don't have a lot of pressures from outside world. So we don't have a lot of deadlines. We have up to two self-imposed deadlines unless we don't feel like doing a deadline, which is kind of nice, right? But the bottom line is that, so for instance, the only deadlines that we do have are if we do a schema change. And the schema change means that the replication has to stop because the downstream users all have to update their service according to the new machine. So now you find yourself in a position where you have to be in lockstep with Google and Ticketmaster and Spotify and Last.fm and all these other companies. That's a bit of a challenge. So what we do is we say 60 days in advance of the date when we do the schema change, we tell people, hey, these are the things changing here. The tickets follow along, ask us questions, what have you. Most of the time, the customers are not really affected by this, but they just have to be aware that it's coming. They have to have an engineer on point that day that can, fix the server, roll out the new software, and make sure it keeps running. Not a big deal. If you've got 2 months' time, no big deal to do that sort of stuff. And that's the basic idea behind this. That's where we need a deadline for. And then sometimes the team is busy and says, yeah, we're not going to do the deadline this year. And they just keep working on their own setup. And part of it then is that if we're working on a new feature, and we determine and we do releases every 2 weeks, right? And if a feature isn't ready, then our community makes it very clear. It's like, hey, look, we really don't want to work with broken features. Like we're just happy to sit out another release cycle for this feature. We just want it to work. What a great luxury we have. And, more or less, I consider that to be part of quality of life. If you don't have deadlines and you feel like, hey, there's a concert, I want to go see the concert, the rule of thumb is go see the concert, work and wait. So that's where quality of life also comes in.
I have a question there, because one thing that I found in Open Collective that is very helpful is, I also hate the word empower. So but essentially it's we try to provide a framework for the team to kind of organize themselves towards that, right? That we call it the Open Collective way. And it's just how we operate in the world and what the general expectation is. And it's basically, we trust by default, don't lie. If you can't make it, it's fine. If you're not at work, it's because you're doing something else and you'll catch up later. But it's like that kind of philosophy. So I was just wondering if you have some tips or some kind of framework that worked for you. I saw on your website that you have transparent finances. So I was just wondering if you also have transparency on these kind of other processes or communication protocols or ways that you kind of generally operate with your team that might be helpful for other communities like this.
So we have the luxury of having started from scratch in this organization. And one of the things we said, instead of asking ourselves, can this be open? We ask ourselves, must this be closed? Right? Which is a game changer, complete game changer. So if you have to ask yourself what needs to be closed, that tends to be board discussions about future partners and potential employee conflicts and employee compensation. I'd like to really kind of fix employee compensation and have that be open as well, but oh boy, what a can of worms, especially when you have people that are sitting in Chicago and in Bangalore.
So
the earning potential is just so different.
Yeah, so just a little point there before you continue. So what we did at Open Collective to do that is we have just levels. So we don't have conversation. You have basic level, mid-level, top level, and then everyone kind of expects that, and everyone is on one of those three tiers, and then that's pretty much it, right? So we removed a lot of the friction, but just having three options. And we're a small team, so it works. Oh. But yeah, so if you have a larger team, you might have more options, but then just having a set of options, and that's where you kind of fit in, then that's it, right? That reduces the conflict of and the friction a lot. And then the company Buffer has an open compensation policy, and they already figured it out. They've been doing this for years. And so we might use this from them, but essentially an algorithm to compensate for cities. I'm generally of the kind of philosophy that it doesn't matter where you are. You're going to get into these three presets. But afterwards, as we scale the team, there's an obvious difference between the purchase, capacity of someone earning the same salary in one city or the other one. So Buffer, you created this algorithm to compensate for that. So if you're ever interested, that's a good place to look.
I may very well touch base with you on that. That is interesting. We're also getting up to speed on doing things like contract reviews and so forth, and trying to be a little bit more professional without getting bogged down in the nonsense of that usually comes with that. So, but yeah, I may very well come back to you on that one. That's interesting to hear. Let's see, where was I?
Quality of life and the things that things that are closed that must be closed, and things that are then generally open.
So quality of life really comes down to just having enough trust for your team to do their job, right? And also, I very rarely will step in and say, you must now do this. My teams should self-organize and say, well, we work for the community. The community is our boss. And every once in a while, if the customer comes in with special needs, or a supporter comes in with special needs, then I might say, hey, team, I need you guys to do this, blah, 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 blah. Right, but I do that very sparingly, to the point where when I do need to step in and say, hey, team, I need this done in a short order of time, my team is actually ready to do that, because they know that this is a serious thing, and I reserve that sort of request for serious things, which is quite nice. But the rest of the time, it's pretty much as you said. My team makes their own schedule, and which can be kind of difficult sometimes. Just the other day, one of our team members needed to have a meeting. And I said, okay, are you guys here? And everyone responded, yeah, I'm here-ish on mobile, but I can follow along. right? But I'm on bus or I'm at a barbecue, whatever. So, that brings about this sort of strange, we're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not really disconnecting from work, but at the same time, you want to be there for your teammates. So it's, while a lot of us don't really disconnect from work a lot, we do have such a high quality of life that the not being able to disconnect isn't that big of a deal. So, for instance, I'm pretty much always on. I travel a lot, partially because I can. So I'll just disappear and, spend 2 weeks in Taipei because I've never been to Taiwan. But I'm working from there. So, I'm running around, I'm enjoying all the dumplings, this, that, and the other thing and so forth, but I'm still working. But really only about 2 weeks out of the year is when I'm actually trying to be gone. And that means I'm only working half hours per day, right? So, but that's just sort of one of those things about running an open source organization. Like, unfortunately, I can't replace myself. I've been trying for a really long time, but I don't know if it's a certain level of idiocy that is present in me to continue doing this, but I can't find somebody else who's willing to do it. So, but then, I personally don't have a problem with not being able to disconnect completely from work because my quality of life is high enough that I don't hold a grudge being able to not to disconnect because my coworkers are my friends. Right. And when something really goes wrong, then I'm going to step in and so forth because, well, maybe my system administrator's enjoying his quality of life and I happen to be at the computer and, well, okay, I better go fix it now. It's a lot about give and take, but I think it's the basic idea is that you need to start with trust. If you don't have any trust and, you second guessing what your team is doing, then you're never going to build a community that's going to self-start and do amazing things. Not sure if it's sufficiently answered the question.
There are no answers. There's only discussion.
Okay. It's a chat. Yeah.
But it's really interesting. There's been a lot of similarities between the other guests of this podcast and just also the prominent voices in this field where pretty much every open source organization I've talked to is also remote first, which they just seem to go hand in hand, right? It seems to be like, well, we're open source. Why not open life as well in some sort of sense?
Yep. Well, because open source came out of being remote. And money and companies came into it much later. So it's just a natural way of doing. And, if somebody is a naysayer says, oh, that'll never work. It's like, well, the Linux, it works. For us, it isn't a question, but it's just if you come with this idea that you don't trust your employees and you need to check up on them every 5 minutes, you're in the wrong field completely.
Absolutely. Robert, where do you want to take MusicBrainz or MetaBrainz, like the kind of umbrella organization? Like, what's your, in your wildest dreams? Like, what do you want to create?
Well, I would like to create more tools that improve the music listening experience, so the recommendation engines and so forth. But there's a bit of a hidden agenda behind this as well. And this hidden agenda is that my primary partner, she's a British woman who is pretty much an entertainer. She plays violin, she sings, and she's also an educator for teaching English. The primary amount of income comes from teaching English. And the money she makes from being a musician is unfortunately just a pittance. How many of you have got friends that are in bands that are playing for beer money with no hopes of ever making any money? I have plenty of those people. Well, I'm really angry with the fact that, okay, I'm a geek. Right? I know how to use my brain, and that means that I get paid a decent amount of money, and I can choose the city in which I want to live. And I live right in the heart of Barcelona, and I feel like I'm a gentrifying force, and I hate that. I'm trying to give back as much as possible and so forth. But it's just the bottom line. It's like, look, I'm a big white male and bestowed with a huge amount of privilege, and that bugs me at the end of the day. So what I really want to do is I want to go and support musicians. Right. I really want to go out there and because what's happening right now, if you look at the recommendation engines inside of the silos, they're recommending the big label content and the small bands cannot be heard. All that data is there, right? You could listen to them if you could find them, but you don't know what to search for. It's not being surfaced. We know that most of the tracks in Spotify have never been played or been played less than 10 times, some ridiculous number. Well, that's not really helping. So if we can actually build a system where we can listen to more small record label content and spread the $10 a month that many of us are spending in much far-flung places. And ultimately, what I'd love to see is that musicians that have perseverance, maybe a slight bit of a penchant for business and marketing themselves, they should really be able to actually have a middle class living, right? And not just say like, well, I'm a musician, but I work at a call center too. That needs to stop, right? So we need to be able to elevate the artists in the world to be able to actually also earn a living as well. So that's kind of the goal. And to that effect, I've also written a white paper that kind of talks about how we can take some of the open source community ideas and actually apply them in the music industry. So because in the music and in the open source industry, we've created an entire industry that's got a whole pile of roles in it. Most of them are unpaid, but a whole pile of roles. You've got software maintainers for distributions. You've got people that write documentation, people that do nothing but lord over bug trackers, right? Like there's all kinds of different roles that have been taken in this. In the music industry, everyone is just sort of standing out there with their hand. Give me money, I'll do something for you. It's not being put on his head where it's like, hey, let's all collectively work harder and collectively see if we can share tips, share studio space, share resources to make music, and then cross promote, and these sorts of things are just pretty much not really happening. They're happening on a very minuscule scale. But open source knows how to do that. We know how to get the right software in the right people's hands, how to elevate people's attention, how to call attention for these things, how to get bugs fixed. We know these things. So why not take these sorts of concepts and actually apply them to the music industry? I think it's possible. So, but one of the critical elements that is a 5-year project is to build the recommendation engines that are part of this, right? Because now there's so much music out there that humans can't do it alone anymore. So we need to actually have curating humans and machines working side by side to actually see if we can find out what the good stuff is. And then we also need to find other volunteers, biz dev types. And, this is where I'm really talking unicorns, because biz dev types are not open source types, are not the types to really jump in to help out with open source projects. But, still we need to find a way in which we can actually take some of these artists and actually give them a little bit of attention and a little bit of help to take their craft and build it into something that can sustain them. It's just a different form of focus on sustainability. And again, the focus that we have right now on sustaining open source, I think could actually play in 5 years' time into how sustaining the music industry, because they're not dissimilar and we're talking about passionate, creative people. We're technically creative and they're musically creative, but, by and large, we share a lot of common values. And so what I like to do with MusicBrainz and to build more data sets, recommendation engines, connect more humans, and ultimately raise a middle class of musicians. Lofty goals?
I was going to say, that's great. Ambition. Cool.
I think that's a great place to end this. I think Pia probably agrees. That's an awesome sentiment. It's been so good hearing you. I feel like I've just been listening in awe at how coherent and beautiful you are.
Thank you. I talk about this a lot. So,
I can tell.
It's great.
Right?
You're good at it.
It comes across like your passion, and it really comes across, which is great.
Everyone who can't see, he's been asleep this entire time, and his mouth is
And next thing to tell people I have a normal haircut, too.
Yeah.
Very, very normal. I didn't want to bring it up.
Very normal.
One of my favorite communities to get involved with these days is the Angular community. There are so many great people there. We've had a lot of them on Adventures in Angular over the last several years. And I really wanted to just highlight people and give you a chance to get to know the flavor and the feel of being around some of these awesome people. We've talked to people on the Angular core team. We've talked to people who have organized the conferences. We've talked to some of the co-hosts that I've had on Adventures in Angular. Nowadays, Aaron Frost is running the show and he's doing the same thing. Typically, he's been doing it at conferences lately, which is a lot of fun. But you get to hear what these people are about and why they care and how they get involved with other people in the Angular community. So if you're looking for that connection in the Angular community and a way to really understand the people who are involved in the Angular community, then go check out My Angular Story. You can find it at myangularstory.com.
All right, so this is the part of the podcast where we do picks. It's the end. It's tradition to have the guest go last, so we'll go first. And it's like 2 or 3 things which we think is interesting, which we should all, look at. I'm going to suggest Brigde Chambuil. I don't know how to pronounce this because it's Gaelic. Brighde, and then Chaimbeul. Some of the best piping music I've heard in a long time. I was driving across Iceland with a friend of mine who's a big piper. I used to live in Scotland. I mean, bagpipes. And Brigda is one of the lesser known artists on Spotify. I think her biggest track is less than 15,000 listens. Highly, highly recommended. Just amazing. Yeah, well, I mean, and the next one is 11,000. The 10th is 5,000. It's really sad. Yeah. At least 10 of those are already me, and I only started listening to her like this week. So that's Brigda Chamboil. It's freaking awesome. Second recommendation is going to be, I haven't read a book recently. Oh no. Pia, what are your picks?
Okay. So I'm going to start with a book, just because. So I am reading A Snow Crash, which I hadn't read. It's so freaking good. It's giving me a hard time to fall asleep at night. I have the habit of reading every night in bed since, I don't know, I learned how to. Yes, this is, I'm very tired in the mornings. If you haven't read Snow Crash, it's amazing how, for a book that is like focused on hackers and technology, and it's been written in the 90s, how absolutely timeless it is. It's crazy. Like there's some quotes here.
Neil Stephenson, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Neil Stephenson. Yeah. So anyway, that's my book recommendation. And then I have a toy store recommendation today, which is Juguetronica in Madrid. Is this amazing robot and electronics toy store. I took Roma the other day and she loved it. And in the basement, there's like a robot museum. They have like this really cool collection of robots, and there's like a 45-minute kind of talk around it. It was great. Roma is my 4-year-old, so she loved it. We got back home with like a set of Mechanos and a robot dog that I'm regretting. But anyway, and then the the last recommendation is the Science and Technology Museum in Madrid. If you're here, it's free and it's awesome. Like take your kid or go by yourself. It is really, really good. It's air conditioned, so it's fantastic. And I highly recommend it. It's really, really cool. Science and Technology Museum.
That is awesome.
I think my partner's 9-year-old son would really appreciate the robot museum.
It's great. Definitely, yeah. Roma was playing around with an R2-D2, and it's also very Star Wars. So it's great. Yeah.
All right. So my recommendations. I've recently re-fallen in love with an album by Peter Gabriel called Passion. It is the soundtrack to The Last Temptation of Christ. It's not necessarily my favorite movie, but the music itself is just really on point and fantastic programming music for just put it on and I just float through my days. It's really lovely, quite good. The counter tip to that one is that there's also an album and it's become more difficult to find called Passion Sources. And it lists all the music that Peter Gabriel used as inspiration for this particular album. So really quite interesting. And then to riff off what Pia was saying, I recommend the Spanish TV show Casa de Papel, because I'm currently using that as it's on Netflix. So I'm watching that to learn Spanish with my comprehension. Listening to Spanish has been really still pretty poor. It's like everybody in Barcelona see me coming and they just want to speak English to me, right? But it makes it difficult to learn Spanish, especially in a Catalan.
Yeah, right? I was going to say, it's a tricky proposition.
It is, and it's taken me far longer, and I'm very, very embarrassed by this. But I have to say, Casa de Papel, the thing that's beautiful about it is in Spanish. It is, all the Spanish swearing and everything. And it's the colloquialisms that I direly need. And, it's also good that it's not Barcelona. In fact, that it's Madrid. So, and that's the reason why I'm a little bleary-eyed in the morning, because I'm spending my evenings watching Casa de Papel.
Yeah, it has great reviews. I haven't seen it yet, but everyone raves about it.
The writing is good, and the characters are well developed, and it's quite good. I don't know if there's even any version of it available in English, so that might not be much help to you. But for us,
it's probably subtitled though in Netflix.
I don't even think it has English subtitles.
No, really? That surprised me.
It's just Spanish, but the good thing is that the subtitles actually match the words, because you can go and watch a whole bunch of other things with Spanish audio and subtitles. But since they're being done by separate contractors, and contractors only being in snippets at a time, they hardly ever match up, which is terrible for learning idioms and learning to understand the whole language. It's a godsend for me.
That's a project for your next organization.
No.
It's a pretty cool project.
Yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to run my mouth at length. I'm always interested in talking about sustaining open source because it seems to be a very pressing topic and getting more pressing by the day. And in general, we need to. I really like in the post-capitalistic society, we need to figure out how to actually go from competition to cooperation, and sustaining cooperation is. I think you folks are actually, a little bit earlier than the mass wave. Like, we need to think about this more. So the more conversations we can have around this, more people talking about this, because I'm absolutely sick and tired of this capitalistic world where actually in the process of trying to start another open source project nonprofit, and at this time actually on a sex education bent and 3D printing. Don't ask. And just trying to create a nonprofit is horrendously difficult, because nobody will give you a bank account because of all the money laundering.
But that's what Open Collective does. So we have a foundation that would absolutely be able to help you out in the US. Absolutely. So let's chat off this.
Robert, if someone wants to chat with you about anything you brought up, where can they find you? Where can people find you to continue these conversations? Where are you on the web? Do you have a Twitter? Do you have a GitHub? What do you have?
At Mayhem BCN, so Mayhem Barcelona on Twitter. You can also find me, Rob, at metabrainz.org. Yeah, those are probably the two best places to grab me.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Great. Thanks.
Have a good day.
And I think I'll drop you an email about this. Let's see if there's something that can be done about this.
I would absolutely be delighted to help. Just let me know.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.